Jazz chord progressions are often made with a few simple principles, and that has been my obsession for the last few months. So today I would like to sum everything up to have it all in one place and to make it as clear and accessible as possible. So for this video, let's start with the basics. We'll start with a simple chord progression of A minor, D minor, G, and C. This is in the tonality of C major, and these are the degrees 6, 2, 5, and 1. This chord progression will be our canvas for today, and we'll see different ways to make it more colorful as we go. If at any point anything needs more explanation, I will link my full music theory playlist in the description. Everything should be in there. So starting with the basics, we can start adding extensions to each chord. Each chord being made of a root note, a third, and a fifth, adding extensions means adding notes above that. To do that, we'll follow the notes of our tonality. Here we are in C major, so the notes of the scale are all the white keys. Basically, when we add extensions to a chord, we follow the notes of the scale and add one every two. So if we add just a seventh to each chord of the progression, it sounds like this. With the same principle, we can add one more extension and make a ninth chord. Here right away, it's worth noting that you don't have to play every note of each chord. For example, you can add only the ninth without the seventh to make some add 9 chord. And if you play a ninth chord here, it doesn't mean you have to make everything ninth chord in your progression. You can keep a mixture of seventh and ninth chords, for example. Keep it simple. Then we can add more extensions to make 11th and 13th chords. But adding those extensions can quickly make things sound more dissonant, so there are a few rules that you can follow to make them sound better. I've already talked about those rules in my 2 previous videos that are in my music theory playlist, so I'll directly work with the list of chords they make in the C major scale. This is part of my music theory cheat sheets available on my Patreon, so I'll leave a link for that too. So with this, we can select a mixture of 9th chord, 11th chord, and 13th chord written here for the 6th, the 2nd, the 5th, and the 1st degree to spice up our chord progression. So far, we've added extensions above the chord, which is what you should do normally. But with jazz chords, you can also add extensions below. For example, with our A minor chord here, if we add just one extension, we can add an F at the bass to make a A minor over F. We can add a D at the bass to make a A minor over D. Or we can add a B at the bass to make a A minor over B. Do that with every chord, and that allows you to have more options to make interesting bass lines with interesting colors. Now, that's cool, but you may have noticed that adding extensions below completely changes the chord. A minor over F is also a F major 7 chord. They have the same notes. And at the same time, if you imagine that F an octave above, that's actually the notes of a minor flat 6 with a minor 6th. 6th chords are actually just inversions of 7th chords. Now, a minor over D is like a D9 but suspended, without its third. And if you imagine that D above, that would make a minor with the 11th added. And finally, a minor over B. That would make like a B11 flat 9 suspended, which may be another complicated name for a chord that is just an A minor add 9, just like we had in one of our first examples. So all this shows us that adding extensions below a chord is just like replacing it by another chord from the same scale. So a diatonic substitution, diatonic from the same scale. On this chart I used earlier, adding extensions below a chord would be like taking the chord that is 2 left, 1 down, moving on the chart like a knight on a chessboard. So when we started with a minor and added one extension below, that made a F major 7. With a second extension below, that would land on the D minor 9. If we extend that logic, that means that we could substitute a chord for another that is 2 or 4 columns to the left, as long as we add extensions. And that also means that the relative is true too. If we start from a D minor 9, for example, and we remove the root note, that becomes a F major 7. So by extending this logic, we could also substitute a chord for one that is from 2 or 4 columns to its right. Extended chords allow that, easily substituting a chord from another from the same scale, because the more extensions you add, the more similar the chords become, the more notes they have in common. Alright, everything we've seen so far stayed in the confine of the same scale. Now let's have fun. Let's see some substitutions that bring things from outside the scale. You can do a tritone substitution whenever you have a cadence with a degree 5, usually going to a 1. The tritone sub is when you replace the degree 5 by a chord that is just a semitone above the 1, and you play that chord as a dominant, so that can be a major chord, dominant 7, or dominant anything. It's called a tritone substitution because the interval between the G chord that we had before and the D flat that we have now is 3 tones. It's a tritone. So you can do this tritone sub pretty much anytime you have a degree 5 in a cadence, usually going to a 1. Another substitution we can do is modal interchange. That's when you borrow a chord from a parallel mode. So what is a mode? So for example, here we are in C major. Well, to make all the modes of the C major scale, you take exactly the same scale, but start it from each different note. The C major scale has 7 notes, so it has 7 modes: C Ionian, D Dorian, E Phrygian, F Lydian, G Mixolydian, A Aeolian, and B Locrian. Now, to make the parallel mode of C major, you take all those scales, keep the intervals between each note, and start them from the note C to have C Ionian, C Dorian, C Phrygian, etc. And these are the chords you can make with these scales. So from there, we can take any chord we have in our chord progression, so degree 6, 2, 5, and 1, and replace them by any chord from the same column. So for example, let's try to replace every chord except the one by chords from the Aeolian mode, which is the most common mode to take. Then back to C major. Now let's try to replace every chord except the one by the chord from the Phrygian mode. Then back to C major. And you can mix them, so let's try the 2 first chords from the Phrygian mode and the 3rd chord from the Aeolian mode. Now, in a very similar way, we can use OpenStudio's Cush chords. This is a type of harmony game developed by OpenStudio. It's a great YouTube channel that I'll link in the description. So Cush chords essentially are just another type of modal interchange that is combined with some diatonic substitution. Basically, you start with parallel modes, and instead of using them as is, you use their relative major scales that use exactly the same notes. For example, for the C Dorian mode, the relative major scale is B flat major. For the C Phrygian mode, the relative major is A flat major, etc. So we can replace the chords in our progression, usually any chord except the degree 1, by their equivalent degree from those other scales. So if we take the chords from the A flat major scale, back to C major. And if we take chords from the B flat major scale, that makes G minor to C minor to F7. So these are Cush chords, and we could also try to extend this logic to relative minor scales. Why not? When we start with the parallel modes, we can check their relative minor scales instead of their relative major. So that gives us the minor scales of G, F, E, D, C, and B flat. So let's see how it sounds when we take from the G minor scale. That makes E flat major to A diminished to D minor. Then back to C major. And let's see how it sounds when we take from the F minor scale. Secondary dominance is a way we can add chords to our chord progression to add some variations and interest. The principle is that you can approach any chord in your progression by its own dominant. That means you can add the 5th degree of its own tonality right before it. For example, before this D minor, we can add the 5th degree of the tonality of D minor, which is A, major, because it's a dominant. So in the same way, we can add secondary dominance to other chords in our progression by adding the 5 of 6 and the 5 of 5. This sounds great on its own, and it's honestly one of my favorite things to play with. It's simple and effective. But there are 3 ways we can spice it up, and the first way is by stacking secondary dominants. If we look up on the circle of fifth, secondary dominance is like approaching each chord by the notes that it's on its right. Like to go to A, we come from a E, or to go to a D, we come from a A. Well, we can extend that. Instead of coming from one note to the right, we can take it from 2 notes, 3 notes, or even 4 notes to the right. So to go to a G, for example, we can go from A to D to G, or even from E to A to D to G. So for example, here's if we add 2 secondary dominants, and here is where 3. A second way we can spice it up is by extending these secondary dominants diatonically. And that's instead of adding only the 5th degree of each chord, we can also add the 2nd degree before the 5. If we go to a major chord, the 2nd degree will be minor. And if we go to a minor chord, the 2nd degree could be either minor or diminished. So for example, before that G chord, the 2 and 5 will be A minor to D7. And before that A minor, the 2 and 5 could be B diminished to E7. And of course, you can also stack this. We can add more secondary dominants before the chords we just added. Up to now, we've added the 5th of each chord, which is utilizing the perfect cadence to lead to each chord. Well, the third way we can add variations to that is by utilizing the plagal cadence, by using the 4th degree of each chord. That would make a secondary subdominant. This would be like approaching each chord from the left on the cycle of fifth. So A to go to a E, a G to go to a D, or a C to go to a G. And of course, this is also stackable, as you can approach each chord from 2, 3, or 4 chords on the left on the cycle of fifth. So secondary dominants and subdominants can give you a massive amount of variations, and you can have even more options by combining them with what we've seen before. For example, one of my favorite things to do with the secondary subdominant when approaching a major chord is to play the 4th degree major and then minor before the chord I'm going to. Or when using a secondary dominant, you can also replace the 5th degree with a straightened substitution, for example. So, as we've seen, dominant chords are super versatile. And that's because in the cycle of tension and release that is very central in Western music, the role of the dominant chord is to bring the tension that will be released by the next chord. And to accentuate this role, the dominant chords can be altered to bring even more tension. So a dominant chord is made of a root note, a major third, a perfect fifth, and a minor seventh. To that, you can add a major ninth, a perfect 11th, and a major 13th, with all those extensions that will make a dominant 13th chord. From there, you can alter the 5th to a flat 5 or a sharp 5, the 9th to a flat 9 or a sharp 9, the 11th to a sharp 11, and the 13th to a flat 13. And you may alter several of those notes in the same chord. So that's a lot of options, but you can follow a couple of rules to help have better results. Like adding extensions to a chord adds to its complexity, and altering notes also adds to its complexity. So you can remove some of the notes or add less extensions as you go to balance things out. Like for example, if you diminish the 5th, it's pretty rare to have extensions above the 7th. Also, the major third is dissonant with the perfect 11th, so if you have both, either remove the third or raise the 11th. And the flat 13th works better if it resolves to a minor chord, because the flat 13th will then be the same note than the minor third of the following chord. Altered chord can quickly get very spicy, if not pretty dissonant, but we can try to add some to our chord progression to see how they can sound. Alright, so that was a lot of information, isn't it? I hope you're still alive. So, to sum it up, we've seen chord extensions that you can add either above or below each chord, and we've seen altered chords. Then we've seen substitutions and borrowings with the diatonic substitution, tritonic substitution, modal interchanges with Cush chords, and secondary dominants. If you combine all this, it gives you like an infinity of possibilities to either make variations of a chord progression or to harmonize a melody. You can, in theory, harmonize any note with that. Now, if I can leave you with a few last tips on how to play the chord progressions you make with that, try to spread the notes in different ways and reorder them differently. Playing with inversions and how you spread the notes can completely change how a chord sound and make them work better in your composition. Also, extended chords have a lot of notes, and you don't have to play them all at the same time. You can arpeggiate them, or try to play them by little groups to find some melodies, or you can also try to add some passing notes to link the chords together. And lastly, you can approach a chord chromatically from below or from above. That can be with a whole chord coming from a semitone below or above, or that can be with a single note rolling chromatically from 1, 2, 3, or 4 notes away, either below or above. So if that can help you add some flair to your chord progressions. I hope you have a lot of fun playing with all that while I go practice myself. If you want to get all the charts I used today for every tonality, this is all part of my music theory cheat sheet available on my Patreon. I've left a link in the description for that. In the meantime, as always, thanks a lot to all the Patreons already supporting the channel. I wish you all a great day or a great evening. Take care of yourself, take care of each other, and I'll see you next time. Bye!